In May of 2016, Vox published a video describing how the allure of authoritarianism is behind the popularity of Donald Trump. The implication being that more Americans are becoming more authoritarian, and so they are supporting the authoritarian candidate for president. While this point might be true, they are pretty dishonest about everything else. This new generation of news sites with flashy editing has picked up right where the mainstream media has left off, giving only half-truths and being selective in their reporting. Without further ado, let us proceed.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
The 2016 Republican presidential nominee disregards the norms of adult behavior. He disregards the norms of American democracy as we know it.
It should be heartbreaking to every American that we have a front-runner that suggests there will be a religious test for anybody who wishes to come to our shores.
He's so unusual, his rhetoric at times so extreme, that political experts and commentators were blindsided by his rise.
Let's be honest here. Politicians saying terrible things and promising to violate the Constitution is nothing new. The content is the same, only the form is different.
We better be ready for the fact that he might be leading the Republican ticket.
Next, I know you don't believe that.
I'm kind of surprised Keith Ellison called it. I'm also kind of surprised he can keep from drooling all over himself. But I digress.
But I want to go on.
How did Donald Trump attract such broad support within the Republican Party? And what does it mean for the U.S. beyond this election?
Well, my first guess is that the left and right has abused its hold over media so hard that people will support anyone you guys attack. Hell, I almost want him to win because it will piss off the right people. As far as what does it mean for us going past the election, I would say it exposes for the whole world to see the failures of democracy and the state. Also, that most people, like the ones making this video, are incapable of judging politicians outside of the false left-right paradigm.
And it turns out that this is a question that can be answered to a really surprising extent via this niche field of political science. It developed a theory about what's called authoritarianism. Okay,
so now we have the premise. The popularity of authoritarianism is responsible for Donald Trump's success because he is an authoritarian. Amanda here is about to define authoritarianism as it relates to their arguments, and as you will see, it shows either a political bias or ignorance.
We're not talking about dictatorships. Authoritarianism is a term political scientists use for a worldview that values order and authority and distrusts outsiders and social change.
Do you know how to tell if someone's argument is going to be bad or dishonest? When the definitions they start with are tailored for their argument. Think of feminism or SJWs defining racism as racism plus power disparity, or membership in a marginalized group. Discrimination based on race is racism, period. But with the new parts of the definition, they can bend language to fit their narrative and identify who the victims and oppressors are on their own terms. This is Identity Politics 101. Having said that, most of the definition they have here lines up pretty well with the usual ways authoritarianism is defined. As you can see with these definitions I've pulled from various dictionaries, authoritarianism has to do with concentration of political power that is not accountable to the people and focuses on obedience to authority over personal freedom. What does not line up with the typical understanding of the word is the distrust of outsiders and social change part. None of this shows up at all. You know what political philosophy can be at least loosely associated with these things? Nationalism. As you can see by these definitions, nationalism involves love of country and culture, protectionist trade policy, and can include highly controlled immigration. That sounds at least a little related to the second half of the definition they have here. I'm not saying that you can't be a nationalist and an authoritarian at the same time. Donald Trump is likely both of these. But their definition is misleading, and I'm arguing that it is intentionally so. Here is why I think they mashed together the definitions of authoritarianism and nationalism. As you can tell from the video so far, they want to label Trump as an authoritarian. Nothing wrong with that, but their argument is tailored to not inadvertently call Hillary Clinton one as well. This is a great way for gerrymandering the meaning of a term so that it applies to one person, while for another, who the term would apply to under normal definitions, it does not. With this rhetorical technology, you can attack an opponent all the while avoiding the risk of exposing the plank in your own eye. Does Hillary Clinton favor centralized power, order, and authority over personal liberty? You bet your sweet cheeks she does.
And when authoritarians feel threatened, they look for strongman leaders.
Leaders who are punitive, who target outgroups, and who have a simple, forceful leadership style that makes them feel strong. And if you were going to grow that candidate in a lab,
I'm going to bomb the shit out of them.
he would look a lot like Donald Trump.
When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families. They care about their lives, don't kid yourself. But they say they don't care about their lives. You have to take out their families.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed reports.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
In this clip, Hillary Clinton is laughing and bragging about the death of Muammar Gaddafi, the prime minister, or I should say the late prime minister of Libya. And dictator is probably a better word for it, but whatever. Hillary Clinton was the driving force behind unseating him from power through the heavy bombing campaigns of the country and the arming of rebels. He ended up being killed by someone stabbing him in the colon with a bayonet. He was stabbed in the asshole to death, and Hillary Clinton is giddy about it. Is this any different from when Trump threatens to bomb the shit out of someone? I would say only in that Clinton has actually engaged in a bloodbath and seems to have liked it. So here they say that authoritarian voters look for strong leaders when they feel threatened. These leaders are punitive and forceful and all that stuff. Like we just saw, Trump says terrible things, like he's going to bomb the shit out of them, and he's going to defeat terrorism by killing the families of terrorists. Vox is right in highlighting these statements as troubling, but seemed to have slept through Hillary Clinton's entire tenure as Secretary of State and all of the statements she has made about war. Trump is only talking about mass murder, and we would be right in preventing him from reaching that office so that he can conduct it. But Hillary Clinton has actually engaged in it. She oversaw the arming of rebels in Syria and Libya that only destabilized these countries and ended up arming ISIS. She oversaw the selling of arms to Saudi Arabia, a country that kills gay people, and they have been using these arms to bomb the hell out of Yemen. All of this is the tip of the iceberg. She has a mountain of dead civilians and refugees on her hands. Trump is talking the talk, and Clinton has walked the walk with high explosive shoes, dropping caches of weapons all over the Middle East. So on foreign policy, both Trump and Clinton get a point on their authoritarian asshole card.
Authoritarianism is not in and of itself necessarily a partisan issue.
For most of this country's history, authoritarians were likely divided between the two parties. But now, only one of the parties really appeals to them.
Not necessarily a partisan issue, huh? Exactly, it isn't a partisan issue, but something tells me you're going to make me defend the Republicans. And I hate the Republicans. Damn you.
What happened was the Republican Party started to embrace what it referred to as traditional values, and it stood against a series of major social changes in this country.
After initially supporting civil rights, Republicans began courting Southern white voters who opposed racial integration. They turned against the Equal Rights Amendment, denounced abortion, and later fought against same-sex marriage.
Our nation must enact a constitutional amendment to protect marriage in America.
Oh man. Okay, there's a lot of ground to cover here. Here's the thing about the past. Most people were racist. That's how segregation and Jim Crow laws were enforced. Enough people in society supported it, and government wrote it into law and enforced it with guns. Society as a whole had backwards beliefs. But when they changed their beliefs, the government took its sweet-ass time in catching up. To pretend that either party was better or more enlightened in the past is a partisan fantasy. We all know that the KKK was an arm of the Democrat Party back in the day, right? As a side note, it is funny that you accuse Republicans of the past of opposing racial integration when modern leftist groups and activists like Black Lives Matter and SJWs are calling for it today? Are they authoritarian too? Or at least authoritarian-ish? Maybe we can go with democratic authoritarians. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Democratic Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina held the longest filibuster in American history in opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Democratic Senator Robert Byrd was a member of the KKK as a young man. To be fair, both of these men are dead and recanted of their racism long ago. But the point is that the Democrats, up to a few years ago, had living members that were heavily involved in the racism of the past. Actually, Democrats still support two policies, amongst, I'm sure, more, that were created to hurt the black community: the minimum wage and gun control. Look it up. Stop pretending that the Democrats have held all the virtuous positions on race for the past 200 years. As far as the Republicans fighting the Equal Rights Amendment, it was not a cut and dry fight along party lines. The feminists of the day were split on the issue. The Republican Party even supported the ERA in its platform from 1940 to 1980. It was actually opposed by many labor unions because it might invalidate protective labor legislation for women. Last time I checked, labor unions are on Team Democrat. It was actually passed in Congress in 1972, and it was sent to the states to be ratified, but it only got 35 of the required 38 states. I don't know about you, but it sounds like there was a lot of support for the ERA. A decent amount of Republicans had to have supported it for it to have gotten that far. Let's be honest, though. The ERA is a load of crap, and it failing was a good thing. As for abortion, you can argue that Christians wanting to outlaw killing babies is authoritarian, but so is demanding that they pay for your birth control and welfare programs. For being the party of pro-choice, they really hate giving people the choice of how to spend their own money. And finally, same-sex marriage. Again, this is not a simple case of Democrats having supported same-sex marriage for the last 200 years. They never performed same-sex marriage ceremonies in basements and in the woods to avoid the roving gangs of Republicans rounding up anyone that has touched the wrong set of genitals. Does anyone know the first political party to place same-sex marriage on their political platform? The Libertarian Party, as far back as 1972. Keep that in mind as I list off some of the posers who just recently became enlightened. President Obama didn't support same-sex marriage until 2012. Hillary Clinton didn't come out until 2013. Guess who else did in 2013? President George Bush Sr., along with many other Republicans. It took me all of 2 seconds to find articles about predominant Republicans that support same-sex marriage. Crazy. Why did many of the leaders in both parties change their stance on gay marriage only a few years ago? Oh, why could that be? Oh yeah, I know why. Because politicians chase poll numbers, and in 2011 was when the majority of Americans started supporting it. Funny how that works. Pretending that one party or the other was the bastion of civil rights and tolerance, or was literally Hitler in the past, is either incredibly ignorant or dishonest. Don't whitewash the Democratic Party. That's racist. Again, here both Trump and Clinton get 500 points on the authoritarian frequent flyer card.
More recently, foreign threats like terrorism have become major political issues, with Republicans taking positions that align with authoritarian fears and preferences.
So this is pretty funny. A simple Google search of Hillary Clinton war hawk will give you a buffet of war, corruption, money, and death. Oh wait, never mind. That doesn't fit the definition of authoritarianism. She doesn't hate brown people, she just kills them and burns their countries to the ground. My bad.
So Mark Hetherington and Jonathan Weiler, two political scientists, they tracked data over several decades and they found that authoritarian voters were shifting into the Republican Party. So that means that when authoritarians become scared, when they become activated by a particular social change or issue, the Republican Party can't ignore them, and they are a ready-made constituency for a candidate like Donald Trump.
What she really means here is that nationalists, or people with that kind of leaning, are being attracted to the Republican Party. This is especially relevant if we're talking about the people that support Trump's desire to build the wall on the US-Mexican border and deport Muslims. This does not mean that authoritarians are leaving the Democrats, just the ones concerned about immigration and the like. Don't worry, there are still plenty of people in the Democrat Party that are comfortable with voting for an authoritarian war hawk, Hillary Clinton, the destroyer of nations.
Are you going to have a massive deportation force?
You're going to have a deportation force. I would bring back waterboarding, and I'd bring back a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding.
Hillary Clinton was for waterboarding before she was against it. I wouldn't be surprised to see if polling numbers on that correlate with her stance. Or maybe I'm just a cynic.
Testing people for authoritarianism is a bit tricky.
You can't necessarily just ask people, are you really freaked out by social change? Do racial differences unsettle you? Do you support strongman leaders? Because those are very sensitive questions and people won't necessarily answer them honestly.
Are you kidding me? All people talk about is electing strong leaders. They'll answer that for you in a heartbeat, both Democrats and Republicans. And testing people for authoritarianism is extremely easy. Do you support jailing people for free speech? Do you support eminent domain and civil asset forfeiture? Do you support taxing other people to pay for programs that you want? Do you support the government regulating the internet? Do you support mass government surveillance of Americans' digital communications? It's easy. Just ask them how they feel about centralizing power around a small group of people. Oh, I'm sorry. I was operating under the real definition of authoritarianism. Okay, fine, you're right. Under your definition, you basically have to ask people if they're racist. And that's kind of tricky, isn't it?
So instead, political scientists ask people about something more neutral: their parenting preferences.
Please tell me which one you think is more important for a child to have: independence or respect for elders, obedience or self-reliance.
These questions seem like they're about raising children, but really what they're asking people is how much they value order and authority.
Whoa, ho, ho, ho! I thought you were going to devise a clever way to measure a person's fear of outsiders and social change. Are we just going to dump all that and start running with the real definition at this point? You need to work on your consistency here. We're trying to root out the racists. That's what we're trying to do here. Come on, lock it up.
So when political scientists tested these 4 parenting questions against the behaviors that they knew authoritarians exhibited, they found out that the correlation was very close. It was very predictive, at least for white voters.
Using this 4-question test, Vox worked with Morning Consult in February 2016 to poll a large sample of likely voters.
Oh man, these questions are garbage, by the way. Do you honestly think that an individual's preference for child behavior describes their flavor of political ideology? Especially when you give them choices like curiosity versus good manners and considerate versus well-behaved. 3 of these words mean damn near the same thing. I only need one question to determine if someone is an authoritarian. I'll even make it applicable to the subject of children. Do you support using taxation, theft, to fund public schools? If your answer is yes, then congrats. You are a dirty authoritarian that values submission to authority over personal liberty. This isn't difficult. Just ask them about policy stances. And where the hell are the questions about resisting social change? That is an important part of this definition, and it supports your very notion that Trump is an authoritarian while you ignore Hillary Clinton.
Our results yielded a few really interesting things. The first one was that, yes, scoring high on the authoritarianism questions was very predictive of support for Trump.
Oh yeah, and don't think I missed the for white voters part. So what do you mean by white voters? Does this graph only include white voters? Do you mean to say that black people scored similarly but supported Clinton? Are we only going to talk about white authoritarians now? If this is really about authoritarianism, wouldn't you want to include the behaviors of all people? Not just the white ones? Is this like accusing the Republicans of resisting same-sex marriage and then ignoring the black community that votes overwhelmingly for the Democrats, also opposes it, and that has even blocked it in places like California? Come on, Vox. I feel like you're manipulating me here. Come on.
A political science PhD student named Matthew McWilliams has found similar results.
He's done 2 polls, both of which have found that authoritarianism is not only strongly predictive of Trump support, but that it seems to do a better job of predicting it than virtually any other factor.
What questions did he use? The same ones from before? What is the definition of authoritarianism? Did his questions include supporting centralized power and fear of social change? Come on now.
We also looked at what authoritarian voters are afraid of.
On things like car accidents, or the risk of gun violence, or prescription drugs, there wasn't a huge difference between authoritarians and non-authoritarians. But when it came to threats associated with people, and particularly foreign people, authoritarians were much more afraid.
And we identified policies that authoritarians were more likely to support.
So authoritarians were much more likely to say, for instance, that the United States should use force rather than diplomacy when dealing with countries that threaten our interests overseas.
Radical jihadist, ISIS, a barbaric, ruthless, violent jihadist terrorist group. Terrorism. Terrorists. International terror network. Terrorism. Extreme terrorism. ISIS. Muslim Brotherhood. Hezbollah. We are at war. We are at war. We are at war. War. Russia. Russia and Iran. Very dangerous places. Nuclear weapon. Americans murdered. Blood of Americans. Bin Laden. 9/11. 9/11. It nearly destroyed us. People who wish us harm. Threats and attacks. And we were attacked. Where were we attacked? We were attacked. Terrorists who had attacked us.
You've seen reports. Russia's hacked into a lot of things. China's hacked into a lot of things. Russia even hacked into the Democratic National Committee. Maybe even some state election systems. So we've got to step up our game. Make sure we are well defended and able to take the fight to those who go after us. As president, I will make it clear that the United States will treat cyber attacks just like any other attack. We will be ready with serious political, economic, and military responses.
Well, if people really are afraid of ISIS, Iran, and Russia, and want a shoot first, ask questions later kind of template, then Hillary Clinton is your candidate. She has threatened to go to war with Russia over accusations that they hacked the DNC and exposed how she and the DNC rigged the election against Bernie Sanders. It's a great testament to the propaganda around her that the public is unaware of this. If this is important to Vox's conception of authoritarianism, then Hillary is the clear winner. Racial profiling, a national ID, the blocking of citizenship for anchor babies, is tantamount to rearranging the lawn chairs at Bernie Sanders' multiple expensive mansions. I'm sorry, Democratic mansions for the 99%. They are of little importance, but again, useful for squeezing Hillary Clinton out of the authoritarian label.
And they were much more likely to want to sacrifice civil liberties in exchange for safety.
I want surveillance of certain mosques, okay? If that's okay. I want surveillance.
It's a set of priorities that doesn't always align with the Republican establishment.
They don't seem to have that much interest in small government, and they definitely don't seem particularly interested in shrinking entitlements like Social Security or Medicaid.
Okay, so don't be tricked here. The mosques that Trump wants to spy on will be spied on under a Clinton administration as well. After all, if you support invading the privacy of the whole nation, I'm pretty sure that includes all the mosques in the US, whereas Trump only said some mosques. By this measure, Clinton wants to spy on more mosques than Trump does. This is where their argument collapses. So they're saying that sacrificing civil liberties, big government, and maintaining entitlements are authoritarian? I mean, I agree, but isn't that the Democratic Party platform? How can Trump be an authoritarian because he holds these policy stances, but Clinton isn't? You even admitted that typically and traditionally, Republicans don't support these policy stances. You've just made my point for me. As I said before, pinning on those extra meanings to authoritarianism was designed to protect Hillary. But as you can see, they all but called her one at the end here. This is the insanity and the pretzel that they have to tie their brains into to focus solely on Trump. So in the end, the score is tied. Clinton and Trump are authoritarian candidates from authoritarian parties supported by authoritarians. Easy. And I didn't even need to consult some obscure voodoo political science to figure all this out.
This theory doesn't fully explain the Trump phenomenon. Researchers will probably study this election for decades. But what it tells us is that he's benefited from a larger shift in this country, one that goes beyond any one candidate.
Trump isn't just a fluke. He's not somebody who's just doing well because he had name recognition or was a famous TV star. This is a large group of people. They want these things, and they're going to be looking for politicians who can give it to them. And that means that Donald Trump could be just the first of many Trumps in American politics.
I agree. Trump is not a fluke. He is the logical continuation of the politicians that came before him, and Hillary Clinton is no different. Unfortunately, I think most Americans are part of this authoritarian movement, and they don't even know it. Actually, I have another question that can help determine who the authoritarians are out there. Are you going to vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? If the answer is yes, then you, my friend, by definition, are an authoritarian. Don't vote.
I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. That's true.